Welcome in to we're already at week 8. Holy cow, it's week 8.
It is week 8.
How are we doing tonight, man?
We are doing well. It's been a fun week. We had 3 games on the slate last night, have 2 more tonight, and they were a couple of good games and one really bad one last night. South Alabama looked fantastic, but Jacksonville State got a huge win over Western Kentucky, and Liberty had to come back in the fourth quarter to beat Middle Tennessee, which, those 2 games were both solid. Then on the docket tonight, we have Florida International goes to Huntsville, play Sam Houston, looking for their first FBS win still. And then New Mexico State plays UTEP in the battle of schools that are only a few miles apart. So
gonna be a fun one.
Yeah, they both should be. Yeah, we'll have I think McConnell's going to start again for UTEP. He looked better than Hardison, who has been there a long time, but they just Dana Dimmel's squad hasn't looked good this year. So except last week when they showed up out of nowhere and dominated it.
Right. Yeah, it was weird. Yeah. But so you can follow him on X at Houston CFB. You can follow me at Trap Vogel. Follow the show at Gridiron Eve. Getting this thing started here tonight, dude. We're still deadlocked.
Sure are. Yeah.
50 to 50.
Yeah, we were 40 to 40 last week. You would beat me in the early one. I had went with Charlotte +3 against Navy, and Navy shut them out. Defense played fantastic. And the 49ers did almost nothing positive. Then the roles were reversed the next game. I had Troy -3 against Army, and Troy shut him out. And defense looked fantastic. Army didn't do anything. Then we had 2 higher scoring games. I was on the Notre Dame side against USC, and they dominated, played the best I've seen them play in a few years. Then in the nightcap, a game I went to bed feeling good about in Boise -7.5. And I woke up extremely disappointed to see that Colorado State came back and won by 1.
Yeah, on a last-second Hail Mary attempt. Yeah. Pretty wild. Pretty crazy game. That was fun.
I brought up this point to someone a couple of days ago, and maybe you would know the answer if there is one. Do you ever remember a week in college football where 2 Hail Marys were completed to win games? Because we had Houston over West Virginia and Colorado State. I can't remember 2 in one weekend ever happening.
No.
Yeah.
No, I can't think of 2. Not with the implications that this week had either.
Exactly.
In those games, So, not that I can think of, not off the top of my head. You know what's really nice also about that is that Boise State loss actually put Wyoming in the driver's seat, despite their loss this week too.
Yeah.
So they actually have a chance to continue to compete for the Mountain West Championship.
Yeah.
So
I would like to see a Wyoming Air Force rematch. I think that would be a fun game to watch again.
Absolutely. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
So shout out to them. Kudos. Hats off.
Yeah.
Fantastic week. Colorado State is a force. I think they proved that when they played against Colorado. And then I saw them the following week at MTSU. They were really good that week in the second half, not as good in the first half. But fun week. It was a fun week of football, man.
Yeah. I'll be curious this offseason if Jay Norvell is a guy who takes a bigger job at a bigger school. He's clearly doing good things there, did well at Nevada, and he has a past at a lot of big schools. Obviously, Nebraska, UCLA won't have openings, but Oklahoma, Arizona State, Nevada, Iowa State, Iowa, he has a very impressive track record with a lot of big name coaches that could lead to him going somewhere else potentially, I think.
Yeah, I don't think he stays in Colorado State too much longer. He's a very talented coach. We've seen that. To stay in that game against Boise, a game they were not favored to win, and get the win at the end. It also pointed out on X when he posted the video from the Hail Mary, he talked about how good the execution was. It's exactly how they drew it up, where you have Dallin Holker, the tight end, following up to catch the deflection. So
yeah, and that's kind of a difference I made to someone talking about that Hail Mary versus the Houston, West Virginia one. Boise actually defended that one okay. They batted it down like you're supposed to, unlike West Virginia, who had two guys go and try to catch it, and it goes straight up in the air right to a guy.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. That was a fun game too.
Yeah,
that was a very fun game.
Yeah. Maybe saved Holgerson's job. He may have gotten let go had they lost that game.
Yeah. That was the talk. That was definitely a talk going into that game. So they got Texas. Houston's got Texas this week. That's going to be a tough one for them. Now, also have to point out here, who's we got to change in the Gridiron Eve rules, the scoring rules.
Okay.
And it's a talk that we talked about. It's a change we talked about making last week.
We did.
Where we can, if we so choose, challenge on one game a week a double challenge, a 10-point challenge for a game. Now, this can only be used once by one of us. So it's a confidence deal, and it's trying to beat the other to using it if we so want to use it during the week. So just a little bit of a change in the rules. I kind of feel like that there's probably going to be some challenges based on the picks that we've made. So it ought to be a fun one. Before we also get into the rounds here a little bit, we always like to kind of talk a little bit about the Heisman thing. Right now it's Penix, right?
Yeah, it is. I don't think there's any doubt if the election or vote were today, he would win it. And after how poor Caleb Williams looked last week, I don't know if he would finish second either if the election were today, which is probably wrong. I think too many people, whether it be Heisman or draft stock, people are overreacting to how bad Caleb Williams was last week. It's the worst game he's ever played. It doesn't change him fundamentally as a prospect or player, but I think it might in terms of Heisman voting. I don't know if he would be number 2 right now. I don't know who would be. Jordan Travis maybe, or Jalen. I would say no to that. Not that he shouldn't be, but geographically, he doesn't get many number 1 votes because Penix gets them.
Fair.
So I would say Daniels or Travis probably would be, only because they have a higher likelihood to get number 1 votes. The other guy who would be in the running for that to be number 2 is J.J. McCarthy, who I wouldn't put in my top 5, but geographically he's going to pull a lot of votes. So
yeah, that's fair. Yep.
A guy I wanted to ask you about is Jaden Daniels, LSU, having a fantastic year, but their team is just, they don't look like they're going to win a lot of games, but then they do. Like, we talk about how bad their defense is. They're 5-2. They're a decent team. It's tough for me to gauge where he falls in the voting because we think they'll lose more games, but they haven't yet. And there's a lot to his candidacy, I think. So how do you feel about him?
Yeah, I think he's had a great year.
Yeah.
He's obviously taken a huge step forward as a passer. Him and the receivers have stepped up between Malik Neighbors and then Brian Thomas has stepped up really well too. So when the pressure's on Neighbors, it's alleviated because you've got Thomas that you could throw to as well. I thought their offense, they've got 4 or 5 running backs that they're rotating through and having no problem running the ball either, especially with Jaden and his running ability. I don't know about I think there would be a good case with the southeastern voters and probably even dipping into the Southwest now that their guys between Quinn Ewers and Shader Sanders have kind of fallen by the wayside. He would definitely get some first place votes, but I think that even down here in the South, the feeling is Michael Penix, man.
Okay.
I mean, I think everybody was tuned in to watch that Oregon game this weekend, Oregon-Washington. And that was a very impressive performance by Penix. Now, I think there's not much you can take away from that other than, okay, if you can get pressure on him, he's not going to make great decisions. He's going to force the ball early, but he's not going to put it in harm's way.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, it's kind of one of those things where, well, then you got to generate the pressure. Can you do that? That line's been pretty darn good for
It
them
has
this
been
year.
playing well. Yeah.
That's a really good Oregon defense too. Like, we got to give them
Yeah.
credit.
Yeah.
And yeah, they were probably gassed with the sudden change situation at the end of the game when they go 2 plays and score the touchdown. But outside of that drive, I mean, once they buckled down, it was very minimal, success offensively for Washington in the third and fourth quarters of that game. So Oregon's got a really good defense, and I don't think any less of them after watching that game. I think that they're still very much in the hunt.
I agree. Yeah.
We talked about that schedule out there that they've got. Washington has, and it's brutal. As I'm pulling it up right now.
So I'm looking at, do you think, and this is a question that was posed to me earlier, the bigger picture was, does a team make it undefeated through conference play in the Pac-12?
I can't see it.
No, and I think Washington has their 3-game stretch of at USC, Utah at home, and at Oregon State.
And hey, don't forget at the end you got the Apple Cup. You got Washington State right after that.
I'm low on them after the last 2 weeks, but I've also been low on them at times, and then they've really proven me wrong too. So I'm not counting them out by any means.
No, we can't. And that's another one of those rivalry games
is.
where you don't know what's going to happen in the Apple Cup.
Yeah.
So, that's a brutal 4-game stretch for
It
Washington if they're trying to maintain, undefeated records or playoff hopes. That's going to be really tough for them to do.
And USC has, I would say, 4 tough games left. But lucky for them, they're not all in a row as Washington. They got Utah this week. Then to end the year, they have a tough stretch of Washington, Oregon, UCLA in another rivalry game. That's not an easy stretch either. I mean, I still feel like there's 4 or 5 teams who could make that conference title game out there.
And then when you even look at Oregon too, I mean, they got Washington State this week. They're going to Utah the week after, and they still got USC and Oregon State on the horizon. Like, it is absolutely brutal out there in the Pac-12.
Yeah. I mean, we could see any mix of USC, Washington, Oregon State, Oregon, or Utah in the conference title game.
Yeah.
I don't think UCLA makes it, but they could also beat anybody and have a say in who does make it, just because they run the ball well. And under the radar, that's probably the best defense Chip Kelly's had there.
Yeah, they've been good defensively. I think the quarterback is going to end up limiting them because they haven't settled that yet.
Yeah.
Still bouncing between, their freshman Dante Moore and the senior Colin Schlee, and you even still have Ethan Garbers in the mix there too. So haven't settled the quarterback situation. I think until that's settled, they're not too much of a concern on the horizon. Granted, they're still ranked. They're still ranked this week.
They are.
And so I'm not trying to discredit that, but I'm just pointing out, like, you're going up against teams that have not just established quarterbacks, but countrywide star quarterbacks. And that quarterback issue comes back to bite you a lot more often than you'd like to, than you care for it to. So
the last interesting team, I don't want to monopolize too much of our time, but Arizona is surprisingly looking well the last couple of weeks. I mean, they took Washington down to the wire, lost by a touchdown. They went to 3 overtimes against USC, and they absolutely destroyed Washington State this last week.
Yeah. On the road.
Yes. And Pullman's a tough place to win.
And that's when I saw that score, I was like, they had to be in Arizona, right? Because the change to the temperature. Right. No, they were on the road.
And I think for them, the real test comes this week. You had mentioned with but Oregon State, they've kept it tight and played well against teams who are spreading it out, throwing a lot like they do. Now we're going to see the opposite. We're going to see a team that is tough, physical, will put multiple tight ends in the game and run the ball well. I don't know that Arizona's D can hold up to that, but we're going to see, because then they got UCLA the next week, and that they're going to try to do the same thing.
That's fair. That's also fair.
Yeah.
Well, you ready to get into these rounds?
Pac-12 is going out with a bang, to say the least.
They are. It's beautiful. And that's I guess the last thing to put on that before we get in the round, because now that put a thought in my head, do you think the Pac-12 continues to try to play with 2 teams, or are those 2 teams just going to drop to like the Mountain West or something?
If I would have to guess right now, I would think Oregon State and Wazoo play as independents next year, but probably only in football. It would not surprise me if they attempt to join with the Mountain West teams in the other sports, but not football. Where that gets complicated is that conference might say, no, it's either all or nothing. We're not going to let you join in just those other sports.
Yeah, that's
because
fair.
of the revenue with football. But I think if you're Oregon State or Wazoo, you try to make a go of it as independents for a year and see what happens. To be honest, I have no idea what's going to happen with those 2. But that would be my guess for at least 1 year, is that we see them play as independents. The tough thing there is going to be scheduling, because these team schedules are all made up and there's not going to be that many independents to go around. So getting a full 12-game schedule could be tough.
Brutal.
I almost wonder if that happens, if they have to schedule as independents, if we will see a scenario where those 2 teams play each other as a home and home early and late in the year.
Yeah, that's very possible.
Yeah,
absolutely. It might honestly be mid and late year too, because that's when you typically have the problem scheduling. So
probably, yeah, they probably wouldn't do it early in the year. Yeah, that's a good point.
So round 1, as we get into the actual conduct of this show, you like Rutgers at -5.5 over Indiana.
I do like Rutgers. Rutgers is a team who is running the ball well. They are not throwing it great, but they're doing what they have to do with Wimsatt to be effective. They're not putting him in a position to make a lot of mistakes. And their line plays well. Their special teams plays pretty well. They're one thing I looked at too when, examining this game, they're good in the red zone, which if you're chipping away at Indiana, you're most likely going to come out on top. And this Indiana team is not very good. Tom Allen might be gone before the end of the season. This team is full of a bunch of guys that he brought in to save his job. It's not going well. I have to wonder how checked into the game they are. And Greg Schiano is a heck of a coach, and he's doing a good job this year. They had the comeback win against Michigan State last week. They won 27-24. That's their only close win. Every team they've played that they're more talented than, they have won by a lot, and they are more talented than this Indiana team. They did get throttled against Michigan, but a lot of teams have, and it's actually probably been Michigan's closest game so far of the year.
Yeah, 31-7 on set score. Yep.
And then they lost to Wisconsin by 2 scores. I think that was a 24-13, 25-14, something in that range. But it was a 2-possession game against Wisconsin. But also, furthering the motivation, Rutgers sits at 5 wins. They need 1 more to get bowl eligible. After this Indiana game, they have Ohio State, Iowa, Penn State, Maryland. You may not get a win out of that, maybe at Maryland, but they're really motivated to get this game, to get to bowl eligibility and get that off of their backs. And I think Rutgers comes out firing and covers this game by a touchdown or more.
They're 2-0 in the last couple of years against Indiana, and not just 2-0, but also they've covered both of those games. They were 7-point underdogs in 21, where they won 38-3, had a 6-0 turnover ratio.
Oh God!
And beat them. They were favored by 3 last year, won by 7. All the points that you bring up are all great, and the other thing I'm looking at too is their turnover ratio this year right now is +4. So if when you look at Indiana, I'm going to pull up their turnover ratio. I don't think it's nearly +4. I think it's a lot worse than that. And I'm going to double check that.
Just based on their record, I would not imagine. Indiana has thrown their 5 touchdowns, interceptions. they've actually gotten 6 interceptions, so they're plus
Well,
1 there.
that's
But
the
I don't know
fumbles
the
too. Yeah, it's
fumbles.
fumbles. I'm getting
Yeah, I
there.
don't know
It
that.
takes me a minute.
Yeah.
No, their turnover ratio is -3.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
when you take that into consideration, when you look at, they've not recovered a single fumble this year. They've given up. They've lost 4. They're also Rutgers is not a team that's putting the ball on the ground at all right now. They've only fumbled 3 or 4 times this year.
Yeah.
So I'm not challenging. I'm agreeing with you on this. I think they're going to win pretty handedly. And yeah, it is a must win for them if they want to get bowl eligible this year. And I think they're going to do that. I think they're going to do that really well.
Okay.
I like Air Force -10.5 over Navy. And this is one of those where I do have a little bit of skin in this game, because I don't like Navy.
I know.
That's just the Army man in me. I can deal with Air Force. I don't like them when they have to play Army, but I can deal with them. So last week we talked about them being favorites by 10.5 points to Wyoming. You took them and you won that. You won that. You got that one because they were 10.5 point favorites to Wyoming. They won by 7. Wyoming covered.
They did.
I don't think that Navy is anywhere near where Wyoming is as a team right now. Wyoming is, like we talked about, is in contention. They're going to make a run for the MAC West or Mountain West championship.
Certainly.
They're very much in the mix. And Navy has had a couple games where they haven't been all that impressive. Now, I correctly picked them last week to cover and beat. I actually said they'd probably beat Charlotte, even though they were underdogs. They did. But I don't think that they're going to come anywhere near here close to Air Force. Air Force is just a mammoth when it comes to this. The service academies right now, they're miles ahead of everybody. I think that this is probably a 14-point win for them.
Yeah, this game was on my early list of possible games to bring to you, but obviously I didn't. And I'll kind of tell you why. Everything in the history of the Service Academy versus Service Academy games says that the team who is double-digit favorites will not cover. They almost never cover as double-digit favorites, but despite that fact, I was still on the Air Force side, like you are. Like, they're so much better than Navy is, and say what you want about the double-digit spreads. We may have never had a talent or team disparity in the Service Academy versus Service Academy games like this one, because this Air Force team is nasty and they get after it, and this Navy team isn't doing many things right. So I think that's why that the history about the double-digit spread is why I didn't end up going with it. But it's not one that I can argue, and if I had to lean aside, it certainly would be the Air Force side. So I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, normally when you see a double-digit spread, it's closer to 2 touchdowns. It's not a touchdown, a field goal. So I think that's a huge part of this as well. But no, it's I like them. The Air Force is really good. Granted, they're gonna wrap up playing football and they're gonna go sit in chairs for the rest of their careers. So enjoy it while you can get it, guys.
Yeah.
Round 2, you like Georgia Tech -4.5 over Boston College.
I do like Georgia Tech. They are surprising me with how they're doing with Brent Key. They are 2-1 in the conference. They lost the season opener to Louisville, a game which was actually closer than I thought it would be. I was wrong. I believe I picked that on the show here and was incorrect about it. But they lost to Ole Miss, kind of got throttled in that game. Then in the last 3 games, they went on the road to beat Wake Forest, who has turned out to be one of their more disappointing seasons in the Dave Clawson era. They lost to Bowling Green at home in a game which I actually picked Bowling Green on the show. But then they beat Miami in a big one in their last game. We all know, we talked about Mario's clock mismanagement. That allowed Georgia Tech to come back and win. But this Boston College team isn't good. I mean, they're still finding themselves. Castellanos, may turn out to be all right. I don't know that he's there yet. This game is in Atlanta. The heat, especially inside that dome, could make a difference. Haynes King has finally found himself. He's throwing the ball better than we ever saw him do at Texas Tech. Their yards per play is pretty good. They're another team who, on special teams, they're playing well. They're especially in the field position game, they're making their opponents drive the length of the field. Georgia Tech's not running the ball all that well, especially on a per carry basis. Not really moving the chains that way, but because of the things I said they're doing all right at and being at home, I like them to cover this 4.5 against BC and win by a touchdown. I don't know that it'll be much more. And this game is one of those where it could be competitive later, but I like them to get it done and win by a score.
I think that's interesting. You said their Boston College is not good. They're 3-3 on the year. Yeah. They had a very, very tight game against Florida State. Granted, it was at home.
And it was in the red bandana game, which they always play up for.
No, they do. But it was a 2-point game against the number 3 team in the country right now, number 4.
Yeah.
So I kind of liked it. I look at this one. This is a series that since both these teams have joined the ACC, they are tied. They're 3-3 all time against each other as conference opponents.
Okay.
However, Boston College is 4-2 against the spread. So Boston College has always had a way of playing up pretty well for this game. The last few times that they played, they beat Georgia Tech as a 1-point underdog in 21 by 11. They were 3-point favorites in 2020. They beat them 48-27. So the one thing I think Castellanos has really come a long way.
He's a lot better than he was early in the year. That is for sure.
And when you look at them early in the year, the loss to Northern Illinois is not impressive. The loss to Louisville by 4 touchdowns, not impressive. But the last couple weeks, wins over Virginia, wins over Army. Granted, Virginia's not a good team in the ACC, but they've gotten their business done. They went to Army and they won.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, Georgia Tech got beat pretty good by Bowling Green, who's not been good in the MAC.
That is true.
That was a shocker for everybody. So,
absolutely, yeah.
While I hear you, the last time they went to Georgia Tech and they were underdogs, they won. Boston College did.
Okay.
Both teams coming off a bye week, and Georgia Tech really only only won that game over Miami because of the clock management and the play calling of Mario Cristobal. That put him in that position. So I'm going to go ahead. I got to on this one. I got to challenge you on this because I think Boston College is a lot better than you're giving them credit for. And I don't know if Georgia Tech is that good. They've had a lot of close circumstances this year that allowed them to stay in games. And then I don't think their wins have been outside of, South Carolina State. Their wins have been particularly dominant either. I think this is a lot closer. And if Georgia Tech wins, it should be by 3.
Okay. I can live with that. Yeah. Maybe I am only saying they're good relative to the Jeff Collins years, which were atrocious. But
they were.
Yeah, they are. And I think I look at BC. I might be underplaying BC a little bit too. That could be fair, but I just don't think they've beat any good teams. So.
And I'm not so sure this is a good team that they're playing.
It might not be. It might not be. Yeah.
That's kind of my point. I don't think Miami is all that they've been hyped up to be either. So, I know that they beat A&M and all that, but they haven't been particularly impressive themselves. So, my second round, I like New Mexico at +1 over Hawaii. I like so obviously this is really a pick 'em. I thought this is a really interesting line when I saw it. I know that New Mexico, they lost to Wyoming by 9 points. They lost to San Jose State it was a very close game until about the fourth quarter when San Jose State just uncorked on them and just ran up the score. Lost 52-24, but that was a game that they were very tight entering the fourth quarter in. I kind of look at this and I look at Hawaii, who hasn't been that particularly impressive this year either. No. I thought Hawaii would be a lot better than they are after watching them lose to Vanderbilt on the road week 0. Vanderbilt has also turned out to be a 2-win team at this point of the season. So their one win, Hawaii's one win in the FBS this year was to New Mexico State. They won by 3 at home. This is a game that's on the road. This is a game that is a 3 o'clock, I think, local time kick for them, or maybe even it might even be 2 o'clock local time. So it's not the typical night game that they get. They haven't been particularly impressive on the road this year. They lost to UNLV by 24. They lost to Vanderbilt week 0 by 7. I like New Mexico winning this game straight up. I think that Hawaii's not quite there yet. They're still. We said that they were 2 years away when Timmy Chang came in and took over. They're still a year away, but they're on schedule. This is not a game I can see. I don't think they're going to get it.
Yeah, so I'm not challenging this one. There are few people who are more critical of this New Mexico team than me. Nothing about Danny Gonzalez gives me comfort. But if they win on Saturday, that will be their 3rd win of the year, which will tie the most he's had in a season in his time at New Mexico. His record is 9-28. And I thought for sure he'd probably get fired after this year. But they're actually looking better than they have in the past. The first 3 years there, they did hugely different offenses every year. I think they finally settled on what they're doing and know who they are. And once they settled on something, the increments have been small and the growth slow, but there has been growth. They are getting better. I don't know how it'll happen, how it'll end up this year, but this is a pick 'em, like you said, and I don't have enough faith in either side to go against you here. So, yeah.
Fair enough. Moving on to round 3, you like Miami as the underdogs, 3.5 to Clemson.
Or I did when I made this pick, so I'm going with it. Tyler Van Dyke may not play in this game.
Yep.
We now know that. It's one of the few times I will admit that this is a spot where I should have done deeper homework and not just look at the stats and numbers and should have looked at the roster more, which is okay. We all have those sometimes. I'm still not high on Clemson, and to some extent, Miami, even if Ja'Cory Brown starts at QB, I still think they have a puncher's chance in this one. Their defense is pretty good. They were bad last week against North Carolina, but Drake May has made a lot of defenses look bad. That is nothing new for us. Outside of the last few minutes of the game, their defense looked good against Georgia Tech. Before that, the defense really hadn't been tested other than A&M. And even in that game, A&M had the block punt that set them up and then the short field. So Miami's D has played well outside of the North Carolina game. Offensively, we'll see how they look if Brown is in. But I'm also not inspired by this Clemson team. I'm probably lower on them than I should be, but they haven't done a lot of great things either. Klubnik isn't the guy we thought he would be. It's not that he's bad, but he's not as good as we thought. They're also another team. They haven't beaten anybody good yet. They beat Charleston Southern, Florida Atlantic, Syracuse, and Wake. And they've lost to the 2 decent teams they played. Now, I don't know if Miami's as good as Duke. They're certainly not as good as Florida State to this point. But I don't have faith that Clemson can score a lot on this team. And I don't think Clemson's D can play well enough to completely shut down Miami, even if Ja'Cory Brown is in. So I have trepidations with this one, especially if Van Dyke is out. But I'm still going with the Canes in this one.
I think even if Van Dyke was playing, I wouldn't have a lot of faith in Miami. Now, the last couple games, the tough one to North Carolina, they surrendered a lot of yardage to Tez Walker with Drake May making that connection. He really torched them. The entire receiving core really did. And then when you look at the Georgia Tech game that they had the week before, not impressive in the slightest at all. It was a bad game. That's a game that you should be winning. You should be way up ahead. You shouldn't be in that position to lose that game at that point, and they just struggled through it. Coming off a bye week too, that was concerning as well. Now Clemson's coming off a bye. Granted, the last time we saw them play, it wasn't good against Wake Forest. But a little note here is that the favorite has won and covered in this matchup the last 5 games.
Okay.
So with that being said, Clemson's been the favorite the last 4. I'm challenging this. I'm taking advantage for all the reasons that you listed. But I do think that Clemson has enough to win this game and cover it by 3. I think they're going to win by a touchdown or so. I like Clemson a lot in this one.
Yeah, if I was in your shoes, I would consider this one too. This is a game that's I feel like on a knife edge, so to speak. I don't blame you. Yeah.
So now we get to Nevada plus 13.5 over San Diego State. This is my third pick of the week. I know that when we came into the year, you had particularly said you thought that Nevada, I believe you were saying it was Nevada, it was going to be one of the worst FBS teams in the country, right?
That does sound like something I would have said at the time. Yes, I don't recall saying it, but I did have those thoughts, and I certainly could have said that. And looking at their schedule and results, I do stand by that. They are not a good team. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they've lost. They haven't won a game yet this year. The last couple games they played, they lost to Fresno State 27-9. They lost to UNLV 45-27. There's a 7-point loss to Kansas, an 11-point loss to Texas State, and then blowouts losses to USC and Idaho.
And that Texas State game, they were up 17-0 in the first half and then lost.
Yeah, and lost it. Now, that being said, this San Diego State defense is absolutely atrocious. I mean, the offense. The defense is solid, but the offense is absolutely atrocious.
At first I was like, wait.
Yeah, no, I said that wrong. Yeah, no, I said that wrong. Their offense has been absolutely atrocious. Now, they did get 41 on Hawaii. I don't know how they did that last week. I don't see 41 points when I look at that offense. But the rest of the year, they've struggled to get to 30. They've really, really struggled to get to 20 at times this year. They're 3-4 on the year. I do think San Diego State wins the game, but I saw a 2-touchdown spread here, and I thought, I don't know if San Diego State could cover by that much. Nevada's been able to stay in some of these games and keep it tight. When you also look at this, San Diego State broke a streak of 4 straight games between these teams decided by 7 points or less last year. So this has traditionally been a tight game over the last several years. I think that it probably stays tight this time. I like Nevada at 13.5.
Okay. San Diego State is one of those teams over the last 5 years or so. They've been one of the more consistent G5 teams. Kurt Maddox is one of the top D coordinators in the country. I might include him on my top D coordinator list for Farrell. In the off season, they've had multiple guys that have been all conference, went to the NFL and so on. This year, we're going to find out who they are through the rest of this conference schedule because they sit at 3-4, but their 4 losses are to legit teams. UCLA, Oregon State, Boise State, and Air Force. Those are 4 decent teams. They beat Hawaii before, and now, coming up, they have all their conference games. And I don't know how much better the offense will get, if it will get better. I can't imagine their offense gets any worse. But I'm going to challenge this one. I do like San Diego State because I don't trust Nevada can score on them. And I feel like their losses, looking at that schedule, this is one of those where it goes against how I typically make my picks because I usually try to rely on the numbers, quantitative things. I'm doing the eye test largely for this one in thinking that, I've seen San Diego State play a little bit. Haven't seen Nevada as much, but a little bit here and there. And I just think San Diego State's a lot better, but I have very little that I can quantitatively back that up with.
Okay,
But
so it's an eye test challenge.
Yeah, but I'm challenging you nonetheless. Yeah.
The eye test challenge for Hughes here as we get into. But yeah, no, I look at that Kansas game that Nevada played where they scored 24, and then I look at when San Diego State scores points, they allow a lot of points. To Idaho State, they gave up 28. They only won that game by 8 points. If you look at their wins, they're Ohio, they won by 7. Idaho State, they won by 8. Hawaii, they won by 7. So they haven't won by double digits all year. And so this is one of those. I looked at that. I looked at Nevada staying in some games with some pretty darn good opponents because when they played Kansas, Jalen Daniels was playing. They beat up Fresno State enough. Fresno State did not cover that game either. So I'm going to go with Nevada on this one for that reason. But we'll see.
Yeah.
We will see.
Yeah.
As we get to round 4, you like Iowa -4.5 over Minnesota.
I do like Iowa, and I don't like this Minnesota team. This Iowa team is going to be
offensively atrocious.
They're going to be 11-1 and go to the Big Ten title game. They are not scoring points, but they're not allowing points. It's defensively and special teams wise, they're top notch, and I think Kirk Ferentz views this as a chess match of sorts in game. They're not scoring points because they're setting it up that way. So, their mentalities, they're not going to, because they know if they play the long game, if they don't make mistakes, you eventually will make mistakes, and then they'll get you. And if they continually make you drive 80, 85, 90 yards to score, you're not going to. They're going to back you up, play the field position game, get you you're out of your end zone. They'll chip away there with field goals. So I think this game maybe ends up being like 17-7, something to that effect. 15-6 like they had last week against Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. Probably neither team gets to 20 points in this game. But I do think Iowa wins it by more than 4.5. This is one of the worst PJ Fleck teams in a while, too. And I think PJ would admit that, maybe not publicly. But this Minnesota team isn't very good. They sit at 3-3. We got rolled by Michigan last week. They had the huge meltdown at Northwestern before they lost in overtime after being up by like 20. They lost at North Carolina in a non-con game earlier, and at homecoming they had a tough game with Louisiana Lafayette up in Minneapolis. So their guys just haven't been in the system long enough, or as long as Fleck would like. He almost always relies heavily on veterans, and for those reasons, I like Iowa to cover this one win.
Yeah, so the Gophers are just 3-10 straight up and 4-8-1 all time against the spread against Iowa. Well, not all time, but against Iowa since 2010. Yeah. And the underdog is 1-4-1 in the last 6 matchups. Last year they were 2-point favorites against Iowa. They lost 13-10. That's that one time that So that's the one. So, but anyways, my point is that they don't do. The underdog traditionally doesn't do well in this matchup. At least they haven't in recent memory. And Minnesota's pretty bad. The times that they have scored points, they've been in shootouts. 35 is the most they've scored in a game this year. They're not getting close to that against this Iowa defense. Iowa, like you said, is probably going to end up 11-1 and playing in the Big Ten championship game and getting blown out by somebody. They don't have any offense right now. I think last week they beat Wisconsin with 35 passing yards. I mean, no, the quarterback situation is, and that was a big game for their quarterback too, because Sean Hill's former Wisconsin guy, that transferred there. So
Deacon Hill.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah, and now all his best receiver, their tight end, he is out for the season.
He's out too.
You have Luke Lachey and Eric All, their 2 tight ends, both out for the year.
Which is just brutal for that offense. But when I do look at this and I think, well, history's telling me to go with the Hawkeyes. Yeah, I'm going to probably go with the Hawkeyes in this. There's a part of me that wants to challenge you, but I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go. So I like Utah plus 6.5 over USC. This was, when I saw this, I was kind of surprised to see that Utah was not favored in this game, especially after what we saw from USC. Utah the last couple of years is, well, they've had Lincoln Riley's number. Let's just put it that way.
They have.
They're 2-0 against Lincoln Riley since he took over at USC. One of those was a conference game. Or excuse me, they're 1-1. No, that's right, 2-0. Sorry. But they were now the first game, Utah was 3-point favorites. They won by 1. They did not cover. The second time they were 2-point underdogs, they won by 20.
Yeah, they dominated the conference title.
23. Yeah, 23. So as I kind of look at that, when we saw, a couple weeks ago, Arizona figured out how to disrupt the Lincoln Riley scheme, and they were able to do that. Yeah. Notre Dame was able to do that last week. When you put Notre Dame and Utah's defenses next to each other, they're very similar in the way that they're built, the way that they're structured, the way that they play. They're physical. They're going to disrupt this scheme as well. I think it's going to be another tough day for Caleb Williams. And I think that Utah, while they may not win this time just because of the inconsistency they've had at quarterback, I don't know if Cam Rising's back yet or not. They're going to be able to run the ball well enough on this team to stay in it. And I think they'll cover 6.5.
Yeah, up until about 30 seconds ago, I had kind of planned on challenging this one, but I'm not going to. I waffled on it so much. For a lot of the reasons you had talked about, Utah can run the ball well. What they're good at on offense, even without Rising, is going to directly target USC's deficiencies on defense, and that Utah defense is going to get after it. I do think Caleb Williams will be a lot better than he was last week, just because over his history and his entire body of work, we've never seen him be that bad. So I think he improves. But how much improvement does that mean? Like, we don't know. I do think there's a few, and this goes back, I talked about the qualitative things with that San Diego State game. And there were a few qualitative things I liked USC for in this game. Namely, this is a chip on their shoulder game. They lost to Utah twice last year. They will not have forgotten that. I think they're hugely motivated to come out and get a win. Also, it's funny you would mention Notre Dame in explaining that, because I was going to mention them now, but for another reason. USC's in the spot this week that Notre Dame was last week, where if you lose again, you're starting to think about your season as a disappointment. If Notre Dame would have lost last week, that would have been loss 3. You're starting to look at, are we going to nosedive the rest of the way here? We're not going to meet our expectations. USC does that this weekend. That's where they're at, because they didn't expect to lose 2 regular season games. They fully expected to go to the Pac-12 title game and have a shot to go to the playoffs this year. Now, I still certainly think USC can win this game, but I don't have enough faith to challenge it at this line. If this was less than 4, I almost certainly would have challenged it. At this line, I'm not going to do it, because knowing they have to win by a touchdown in a game that could easily be 27-24, I'm not going to do it. So,
the other thing to point out here too is the underdog has covered 6 of the last 7 in this matchup.
That is interesting.
Yep, including 4 outright upsets. Yeah. So 2 of them being, one of them being last year.
Yeah. So two top-notch coaches that you're not going to really fool them, and you're not going to game plan over their heads too much. They're both elite coaches.
They're both good.
Yeah.
Lastly, I've got Ole Miss at Auburn. I'm sorry, you like Ole Miss over Auburn, 6.5.
Yeah. And I do. I like Ole Miss. I think that I like Auburn too, but we'll get into that a little bit. This Ole Miss team is doing a lot of good things. Teams that Lane Kiffin things Lane Kiffin teams have done in the past. They are putting the defenses in conflict. They're making it so your D-backs have to make decisions. Jackson Dart is finding open receivers, tight ends, and they're getting big plays. They're scoring a lot of points. They're making you defend the field vertically and sideline to sideline, and they're moving the chains. We've not seen them, other than the Alabama game, get stopped at all. And also for them, going into the year, we thought they had the best running back in the country. Judkins hasn't been the guy for him this year. It's been Dart. I'll give him credit. He's better than I thought he would have been. But I think now that we're in the thick of the SEC schedule, we may see him run the ball more. Last year, they were a very run-heavy team. They have not been that this year as much. They're having multiple guys carry the ball. They needed everything they had to beat Arkansas last week. They got it done. They won by a touchdown. This Auburn team is 3-3. They've not won a conference game yet. And I don't think that changes this week. Hugh Freeze is a good coach. There are few guys that have been able to show us that they can build a program and have such a quick turnaround as him. I just don't think it happens this week. This year one for him is almost like a year zero. I think they're in a similar position to what Arizona State is in, where it's about getting our guys in the system, and our team is going to be in 2024. That's when you're really going to judge me on. So this Ole Miss team, I like them to win by a touchdown here, especially because Ole Miss is still hugely motivated, and they have a chance for a New Year's Six bowl game. They would need a lot to happen to Alabama to make the SEC title game, but in theory, it's still on the table. And Ole Miss's schedule is tough. They still have Georgia left, which makes it even more difficult. But in this game, I like them to win by a touchdown. Not much more than that, but I think they win by at least a touchdown.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about this is Auburn has played some really good games this year. They've had a few that were good, a few that were bad. Last week against LSU, really bad loss. Lost by 30 to LSU with a defense that's been struggling this year. I think that was a big game for LSU to step up and show what they were, and they did. But when you look at some of these other games, Ole Miss coming off a 27-20 win over Arkansas. Ole Miss, lost to Alabama this year. Auburn is a team that's going to play very similar to Alabama in the way that Alabama does it. And their defense is a little bit better. That I think the LSU game's an anomaly. They held Georgia to 27, held A&M to 27. Everybody else under that, Samford, Cal were all under, and UMass. I mean, those aren't great opponents, but they were all less than 15 points in all of those games. Yeah. The other thing is Auburn has not lost back-to-back games to Ole Miss since 1951, 1952. This has been a series that Auburn has traditionally done really well at. This is a game. This is a big game for them. They lost last year by 14. That was a cover. Ole Miss was favored to win by 15. This year, I look at that 6.5 point spread. I got to challenge it. Okay. And it's because Ole Miss has just enough to absolutely get after it. And, Auburn does. And I think that because of the way their team is structured, the way that they play, it's very similar to what Alabama does. That's a team that Ole Miss really struggled with. Yeah. I think that maybe Auburn doesn't win it outright, but I think it's a field goal game.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Auburn's O-line is a lot better than they were last year. They definitely could lean in the run game a little more than they've been able to. They went out the portal. They got Britton from Western Kentucky, and they brought in some other guys up front. Hugh Freeze is killing it in recruiting. They're doing it very, they've signed some of the elite receivers in the country. Perry Thompson from Alabama is one of them. But, yeah, I can't fault you for this one, but I like my side at Ole Miss in this one too.
So I'm going to go quick because we are running out of time here on this one. My last pick, I like LSU, not able to cover 30.5 over Army. Basically, I think Army last week They didn't score a lot of points. That was really the first time we've seen that all year, where they haven't been able to move the ball offensively. It was a good Troy defense. I don't think that the LSU has a defense like Troy's does. Last week, I also mentioned that I thought that was a bit of an anomaly with them allowing Auburn only 18 points. When you look at their last few matchups, 39 they allowed to Missouri, 55 to Ole Miss, 31 to Arkansas, and then even 45 to Florida State. All really solid teams, maybe not Arkansas, but Army's going to be a solid team. They're going to be offensive, and when they have the ball, they're going to be able to control it and keep that clock possession going. So I think that while they probably fall into a 2-touchdown hole relatively early, it doesn't extend much beyond that, and Army covers 30.5.
Yeah, this is the weekly I'm not touching it game, even though that hasn't happened in a couple weeks. So at this spread, there's no value in challenging, I feel like, because LSU is so much better, but like you said, they can't tackle anybody. Their defense is terrible, and Army's going to churn out the clock the entire game. So it reminds me of that week 1 game where I picked ECU to cover 30 points against Michigan. It's going to be on a knife edge at the end of the game, and LSU is going to be close to doing it. But I don't have enough faith in them to win by 5 possessions because of the style Army plays. It could be a 28-point game, but that doesn't do you any good in this spot. So I'm not touching this one.
So that means we got 4 challenges this week.
Yep, we do.
You challenged me on Nevada at 13.5 over San Diego State. I challenged you 3 times. Georgia Tech minus 4.5 over Boston College, Miami plus 3.5 over Clemson, and Ole Miss minus 6.5 over Auburn. So, wow, 4 challenges and no double challenge used this week.
No.
We're going to save that for next week, I suppose, when stuff really starts to get tight. And we will take it from there. Oh, you just lost your lights.
The
motion sensor.
The custodian out in the hallway turned off the lights, which my room is hooked up to a communal suite light. So that is what happened. Yep.
Well, I guess somebody's trying to run us out of here, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got any last notes here before we get running?
A game neither of us picked, but should be a fun one. Duke, Florida State, big game for both teams. And then we got Tennessee, Bama as well, battle for the cigar. So we'll see what happens in those 2 games.
A lot of Sharks really like it Tennessee, and I'm not buying it as a Tennessee fan.
Yeah. And then the other big one, Penn State, Ohio State, in a game that certainly will go a long ways towards determining who's going to be in the Big Ten title game. Well, either of these teams, they'll both have to play Michigan later on, but it should be a battle.
Should be a tough one. I think I like Ohio State on that one personally.
Okay.
It's a smaller spread, but I like Ohio State there. So no bonus one.
Okay.
Guys, thanks for tuning in. This has been Gridiron Eve, and let's get ready for some college football tonight, tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday. For Mike Huseman, I'm John Vogel. Thanks for tuning in.